Welcome to this exciting session on Sattology, debunking mythology. And here we are going to talk to an extremely friendly and extremely knowledgeable person, an analyst on strategic affairs. You have seen many videos of his past, and many of you are following him in a way that people follow Hollywood stars from Sattology. So without delay, let's bring on Abhujit Iyer.
Hey Bhavani, great meeting all of you.
Thank you. Jai Bhavani and Har Har Mahadev.
Har Har Mahadev too.
So without delay, this incident on the Indian Indo-Chinese border, and what is that exactly? If you want to tell these students.
Okay, so what happened was that I have to take you back in history very quickly. Modi thought, like a lot of presidents and presidents in America think they can solve the Israel-Palestine dispute on their watch. Prime ministers in India think they can solve China and Pakistan on their watch. Like American presidents find out, Indian prime ministers also find out that they can't solve anything. Usually they end up with a great big mess on their hand, which doesn't prevent them from trying. Modi tried this with Nawaz Sharif, and he invited Nawaz Sharif to his first swearing in 2014, burnt his hands, and now they don't talk to each other at all. With China, the same thing happened. When Xi Jinping first came over and got, was being cajoled on a swing on the riverbank in Ahmedabad, in Gujarat, there were Chinese troops on Indian soil at that point. But Modi thought he could charm Xi Jinping. He tried. And then Doklam happened. And Doklam was somewhere near the Bhutan border. It's on the Bhutan border. They weren't occupying Indian territory, but they were occupying Bhutanese territory. And because of the mutual aid agreement, we went in to protect Bhutanese territory. Turns out the Bhutanese didn't want our protection and they caved. But anyway, that's a different matter. So this is when Modi found his spine. He said, look, I hosted you and this is what you do. And you better behave yourself. And he went and prevented the road from being built in Doklam. And what then happened was a few months later, he got invited to Wuhan and Xi Jinping basically charmed the pants off Modi. So Modi let his guard a bit down and the Chinese came in and finished building the road in Doklam because they'd worked on the Bhutanese by this point. From this point on, Modi doesn't trust China anymore, just the same way he stopped trusting Nawaz Sharif. So ever since he won the election in 2019, there has been a massive infrastructure construction program. For a long time, Indian governments thought that even though the Chinese were building up huge amounts of infrastructure on their side of Tibet, India thought that not building up infrastructure is first a sign of goodwill, B, that it was the best way of preventing the Chinese from coming in. Because if we built up infrastructure, the Chinese would cross the border and then use our infrastructure to come into the plains. Very short-sighted thinking. That ended. And ever since May of last year, May 2019, there has been massive construction activity. Now, this construction activity, combined with the bifurcation of Kashmir into Ladakh, what is now the Union Territory of Ladakh, combined with the internal problems in China right now because of COVID, basically have made China aggressive across the entire board because they want some kind of external diversion. They don't want a full-on external diversion. They just want to keep the pot boiling. So what they did was they came in and tried all these stunts. Now, if you look at Ladakh, there are 3 points. The northernmost is Galwan. In between is Hot Springs. And finally, there's Pangong. In Galwan, they came in for a few days. We kicked them back. And that's how things were till the 15th. In Gogra, they were patrolling across the border. We kicked them out and we constructed a permanent base camp through the valley, in the valley through which they used to keep coming in. So we stopped that. In Pangong, the Pangong lake is split half and half. Technically, the whole lake should be in India, but ever since 1962, only half the lake's been in India. And that half, we used to keep patrolling on their side, they used to keep patrolling on our side. But as of October 2014, we had constructed a camp at Finger Ford, which was meant to be the halfway point, which prevented them from coming in. And since 1999, they've been building infrastructure on their side. So what's happened at Pangong is we no longer can patrol on their side, and they can no longer patrol on our side anymore, at least since 2014. Now, the mischief here is people keep saying that losing the right to patrol equals the loss of sovereignty. Are you kidding me? You're telling me that building a road right up to the very tip of finger 4 did not indicate Chinese sovereignty. Building a naval base at finger 5 did not indicate, finger 6 did not indicate Chinese sovereignty. Building an artillery fort and a radar station at finger 8 did not indicate Chinese sovereignty. Very tough to buy these arguments. So what's basically happened is that we have formalized a status quo in Pangong. And in Galwan, we have prevented them. What they have done to us in Pangong, we have prevented them. We had already prevented them in 2014, October 2014 in Pangong. And now we're preventing them from doing it in Gogram. The problem came out in the northernmost one, Galwan. Now, Galwan, what had happened was the moment we kicked them out of our territory, they blocked this river for the last month or so. Not last month, say about almost a month. They blocked the river. Now, the issue was the river by itself isn't important. It's the precedent that it sets that's important, because China is the upper riparian power, and most of North India's rivers are fed through glacial flows from the Himalayas. It was important that we break this dam or whatever, some kind of obstruction that they were using to block this river from coming into India. And what happened on the 15th night is that our troops basically went into the Chinese side of the LAC to break this dam. And they didn't succeed completely, obviously. That's why all the bloodshed happened. They went from the hills to kind of outflank the dam on the valley and, I don't know, blow it up or something. They didn't succeed, but the message it sent to China, if you remember at the beginning, I told you China wants to create diversions, but it wants to calibrate them very, very carefully. The very fact that we were willing to lose about 20 soldiers to break this dam and kill about 45 of their soldiers really scared the living daylights out of the Chinese, because for the first time they couldn't predict. They'd always seen India being very pusillanimous. India stopped being pusillanimous on the night of the 15th. And that is why what we've seen now is 2 days later, on the 17th, they completely opened up the river, and they've been depositing all the detritus on the Indian side of the border to show. It's a confidence building measure to show we have dismantled the dam. And we're basically back to status quo ante in a much stronger position now, because China knows what the consequences of river blockage are going to be. That's the summary of what happened.
Excellent. And I think you put it in the best possible way, and probably the best I've heard. Now, coming back to the question, when the Americans right now, President Trump has had a very confused response, and initially he tried to mediate, and he later understood that India doesn't want the mediation from him. The Americans have a history of making a friend of someone and then destroying them. That's the past, overall the world history people have seen. Now, how much does the Indian government and Indian strategists trust the American goodwill at this point of time?
So I would completely disagree with this characterization of American history. I think the only person that America has actually backstabbed so far has been Taiwan. And even there, the American commitment to the defense of Taiwan is still enormous. Let's be clear about that. Taiwan has privileged access to American technology. Taiwan gets more or less what it wants from America. The only problem, of course, has been that Taiwan's internal procurement policies are they're almost as bad as India's. Let's put it that way. They've also got something of a dinosaur like our DRDO, which keeps saying, we can develop it, and then develop a substandard product. So they also have these problems. But if you remember, during the Straits crisis in 1997, Bill Clinton had sent the entire, the 7th Fleet or the 6th Fleet, I forget, but one of the aircraft carrier battle groups to sail between Taiwan. This was when Taiwan had its elections as well, between China and Taiwan to deter China. I don't think the Taiwanese are in any doubt America's commitment to their defense in private. In public, they complain. So I will never agree with this characterization that America dumps its friends. America actually goes to great lengths for its friends within reason. Um, number one. Number two, Trump, I'll tell you what the problem has been. I don't think Trump has been confused, and I don't think Secretary Pompeo has been confused either. The problem is, Trump would always like to mediate everything and take credit. We need to separate that from the fact that Trump actually thought things were going nowhere and he wanted to sort of not calm things down, but at least try to get involved in the process, get some credit as well. Of course, I mean, with Trump ego, you can't deny that. The main issue has been that, in America, it's not the Indian side, it's the American side that has trust issues with India because, for very good reason. Because even after 1962, India went on supporting the Vijay Lakshmi Pandit, Nehru's sister, Nehru, Indira Gandhi, they all supported China's membership of the UN Security Council. As in China to replace Taiwan as on the Chinese permanent membership of the UN Security Council. Even now, the very next day after this happened on the night of the 15th of June and ended in the morning of the 16th of June. On the 17th of June, the Hindu runs a op-ed by the former National Security Advisor of India saying non-alignment is still a good policy. You tell me what US president is going to take a country like this seriously? India has a huge credibility deficit. We've discussed this before, how Morarji Desai and I.K. Gujral gave up our intelligence networks in lieu of quote-unquote goodwill of Pakistan. You never do that. I don't know what giving up intelligence networks has to do with goodwill. Why do you have to give up tangibles for an intangible? I don't know. This government has also done that, by the way. Chidambaram was feeding the Baloch insurgency and Doval went and stopped it. I don't know why. It was a good insurgency. It was creating a lot of havoc inside Pakistan. It was a good thing. He stopped it. Again, we don't know why. India has a reputation for being a backstabber. India also has a reputation for being particularly dense. I mean, forget lead. This is like, something like 120 on the periodic table kind of density. Tungsten, maybe. I mean, even higher than tungsten. Tungsten still doesn't even come up to 100. This is next level. This is like depleted uranium armor. It's like that. It's that level of density that Indian diplomacy has in its head. And there's a very good reason for that. You look at where they all come out of. The humanities is completely captured by the left in India, as it is in America as well.
No.
And the problem with the Indian left, unlike the American left, is this extraordinarily benign belief in China. That China is somehow this benign state. It is the ideal state to be looked up to because it was an Asian country racked by tradition and it destroyed all its tradition and became a modern state and so on and so forth. They look up to it. Even the Indian bureaucracy is completely corrupted by the fact that it gets trained in an environment like this, right? So we have huge issues systemically. The Americans can't trust us. Nobody can trust us because we're our own worst enemies. Forget 50 Shades of Grey. India's policy is so masochistic, it could be a whole BDSM erotica thing all on its own.
No, great points. Now, another point that, and sometimes I'm being the devil's advocate. Now, one thing for Americans, being from the American political, I'm part of the politics here. One thing they are known is that they have also lost their strategic objectives globally, because the last few wars which America has fought are not against nations but against the groups within the countries. So the armed forces have been dealing with the terrorists rather than a nation state armies. So the strategic viewpoint of American forces is also lost to a large extent, unless there is a large global war. Now, this China crisis presents them an opportunity to re-establish America as a global superpower. So Will India or can India be a part of this solution where they can be part of the global superpower game coming away from the aligned movement? Or is it a bad strategy on their part of India to join any large group?
Look, India should definitely be in the American camp. The problem is India is such a liability at the moment. We're not going to become a superpower in the next, not in my lifetime at least. So, I mean, America might want to think long and hard before it has an unreliable ally like India, doing interoperability with it, especially on sensitive things like the Link 16, which connects all, which networks all American defense systems and so on and so forth. Number one. Number two, you know, this is something about US foreign policy that I've been railing on since day one, that ever since the Soviet Union collapsed, they have fought wars for principle rather than interests. And Cardinal Richelieu, the great French statesman in the 1600s, who's also the subject of the Three Musketeers. He's the arch villain of the Three Musketeers, that that entire series of books. But truly great guy. He used to say, revenge is a luxury that statesmen cannot afford. And there are different quotations of this. One is that revenge is a luxury statesmen cannot afford. There's also pride is a luxury that statesmen cannot afford. And the third version that I've seen is principles are a luxury that statesmen cannot afford. So when you go in trumpeting democracy, regime change for democracy, it becomes very, very problematic. And I'll tell you why. You can't shove democracy down people's throats. Democracy is when people themselves are mature enough, when a society is mature enough that it accepts room for all divergent points of view and accepts loss in an election to your own people, right? Many countries, including very poor countries like India, have achieved that level of maturity. Several countries simply have not. Syria never did. Egypt never did. Afghanistan never did. Vietnam still hasn't. And you can be technologically advanced. That doesn't mean you're mature enough to become a democracy. Democracy is not an end goal to be. Democracy is a symptom of society. It is not an end goal of society. Okay, and this is the fundamental philosophical difference we have with all these democracy advocates around the world and regime change advocates around the world. So what did America do? It decided to go in on things like, bombing Serbia for the ethnic cleansing, which was actually the right thing to do because they were actually being ethnically cleansed. Not that the Kosovars and Bosnians were particularly innocent, or the Croats were particularly innocent, but yes, the preponderance of guilt in this case was on the Serbian side, so they went in. The problem is, this gave a lot of power to people like, what was that redhead lady who was the American ambassador to the UN? Susan Rice, was it? She was a reporter during that time. And she basically she converted this kind of humanitarian intervention, gave journalists like her a lot of prominence in policy circles when they were never meant to be in policy circles. The lady doesn't have the brains to be in a policy circle. But because she actually believes, that's the most dangerous thing you can do. A statesman should never believe, they should never drink their own Kool-Aid, to use an Americanism. She unfortunately drinks far too much of her Kool-Aid, and her Kool-Aid is either hash flavored or crystal meth flavored. I don't know what it is, but it's sure as hell some kind of flavor that I don't want ever. I don't want it. I don't want any of my to-be kids to have it. I certainly don't want my dogs drinking it either. But anyway, she drank lots of it. And then it became sort of, she was the symptom of what was happening in America. They came up with responsibility to protect, then responsibility during protection, basically all different words for regime change. Where you don't understand a complex society, you go in and you destroy it. So tell me, how is what Barack Obama did in Libya or tried to do in Syria any different from what George W. Bush did in Iraq or in Afghanistan? Okay. Afghanistan was already a broken society. So, I mean, leave that aside. That's a completely different matter. But I mean, how is it any different? Today, because of what Obama and co did in Syria and Libya, we are seeing the rise of nationalism all across Europe, virulent nationalism. There is also good nationalism. Remember that not all nationalists are virulent, but there's also a very virulent strain of European nationalism on the rise, xenophobia on the rise. Huge social issues. There were so many shocks for the EU to absorb. Grexit. Well, I mean, Greek kick out really, not voluntary Grexit, but things like that, Brexit and all of that. And on top of that, you've swamped them with all these identity issues and xenophobia issues and things like that. And they're not misplaced. Remember that these people are coming from brutalized, violent societies where, Europe has learned self-control. Europe, there was a monopoly of violence of the state and they learned self-control over 200-300 years. Do you know the last witch hunt, literal witch hunt in Britain was sometime in 1917 or 1918, I forget, where a woman suspected of witchcraft was killed with a pitchfork, as witches were. Imagine it took them 300 years to stop this kind of nonsense. And you suddenly have a population that believes that it can go around doing whatever. They find this freedom totally liberating and they don't know the limits of that freedom. That social restraint hasn't been bred into them or conditioned into them. And this is what you're seeing in Europe now, that Europe is becoming a hellhole. This American policy, there's this saying that the path to hell is paved with good intentions. That's exactly what responsibility to protect and human rights did to American policy. There is no such thing as a human right. Let's be clear about it. This whole concept of a nation state. What is a nation state? It's an imagined identity, right? Money. There is no such thing as money. Money is a construct. It's just a fictitious thing that you have devised. It's just a piece of paper, It's just an electronic number in your bank account, which is actually worth the amount that it takes to move those electrons is less than the worth of printing the paper in your hand. And yet you've got $7 million in your bank account. You think you do. It's actually nothing. You have nothing in your bank account, right? It's just numbers. Human rights is like that. Tell me what other animal in the world has rights. Because we are a supposedly superior sentient being, we assume there are these things called rights. It's a construct. But remember, these things come sequentially. Rights is a sequential battle based on anthropological development, where you are mentally developed enough in certain other fictitious social constructs, where you can claim certain returns for the protection that the state provides you with and the taxes you provide the state with. I don't think America understands that. The thing I fear the most is the fundamentalist. And it doesn't matter. This is not Islamic fundamentalism. I fear Hindu fundamentalists, who there are too many of. Amazing, because Hinduism says that there is no one path. And yet you have far too many Hindus who believe that there is just one path and they are right. It's my way or the highway. I fear Christian fundamentalists. I fear human rights fundamentalists. They are, in fact, the most dangerous kind at the moment. I fear Black Lives Matter fundamentalists. I fear all fundamentalists. If you are unwilling to examine your belief systems and you are convinced that you are right, you are fundamentally a dangerous human being.
No, absolutely. I think you made some very, very valid points. Now, coming back to the question of dharma, like US exports democracy. And is it a good idea for India to also consider exporting dharma to remove adharmic values?
No, because look, dharma is a personal belief system that each person has to evolve for themselves. I believe I am dharmic even though I'm a charvak, I'm an atheist. And yet I believe I uphold the principles of dharma. I speak the truth no matter what. I'm quite abusive on Twitter, but I don't feel that's adharmic at all. Nowhere does it say that you shouldn't be nasty to people or whatever. I care a lot for animals. I look after street dogs and street cats. I do other charities as far as education goes. And it isn't because I'm worried about my rebirth, because I don't believe in rebirth. I do it because I have a moral compass that makes me feel good when I do things like this, right? And that is ultimately what dharma is about. Now, which version of dharma are we going to export? Are we going to export Vaishnavism? Are we going to export Dvaita? Are we going to export Advaita? Are we going to export Charvaka? What are we going to export? I never approve of mixing of spirituality with the state, right? You look at what Chanakya says in the Arthashastra. Tell me, at which point of the Arthashastra does he bring in religion? Where does he state that this is in any way dharmic or not? And yet, the Mauryan state was a fundamentally dharmic state purely because it was an amoral state. Remember, dharma is about, why do we keep emphasizing detachment, It's so that you don't get carried away by emotion. The more detached you are, the less wedded to ideology you are. That is the dharma of a politician. That is why it is called Raj Dharma. Okay, it is a very cold, calculating dharma where you shouldn't think twice, because Chanakya tells you when should a king kill his own son, when should a king blind his son and not kill him, things like that. And yet it is dharma.
Exactly.
So remember this. My issue is, if you can't fall into this ideological trap that America has fallen into. Human rights is the dharma of the West. We can't afford to fall into this definitional trap of what is dharma, of what is a very broad and can be interpreted in a million different ways by a million different people, and then make it the basis of export. Should we be exporting our soft power in terms of Hinduism, not dharma, Hinduism, Buddhism, and all of that? Yes, but it should be done in a very, very different way. You look at the kind of intellectual caliber of 90% of the Hindu preachers around. There was that, who was that Sikh guru who got sent to jail for rape for 20 years and then it caused riots?
I don't know the name. Yes.
He appears in a lot of movies. Messenger of God. Yes. Horribly racist movies, by the way. Have you seen them? You should. The casual racism in them is just like next level. I've seen a lot of gurus who talk rubbish. Okay,
Right.
the level of intellect is very low. And I shudder to think, if we export dharma, if these are the kind of clowns we'll be exporting. But remember, this is the beauty of Hinduism, that I would be condemned for saying this in Hinduism, because I have my own level of Hinduism. I should not be mocking other people's levels of Hinduism. I have to respect what they respect, full stop.
Right.
The problem right now in Hinduism is that they are not willing to respect that what I respect. I am willing to keep my nose out of their business. They're not willing to keep their nose out of my business. That is the problem right now.
That's right.
And as long as that is the case, unless you can get to a Chanakya style Arthashastra where he is only concerned about the king doing good for the people, and not good, efficiency, because he doesn't get into these moral judgments of what is good, bad, and things like that. It is completely amoral, not immoral, amoral. We have no prospect of exporting dharma. In fact, Indian politicians, Indian governments, I'm yet to see one function with the principle of dharma. How are an adharmic people going to export dharma?
Now, coming back to the point, and we had, I do not even know what to name this video as right now, because we have covered so many points that I don't know what to name this video. Now, coming back to the essential point that we started off with, and you named Chanakya a couple of times. What would have Chanakya done to POK and China if he was alive as an advisor to the Prime Minister of India?
Given the current Prime Minister's affinity for third raters and morons, I think Chanakya might have committed suicide. But assume, I think Chanakya would have been too smart to make the cabinet under this government. But anyway, assume
Only
that.
you can say something like that. Only you can say. You're the fearlessness over there.
If Chanakya was the PM. Surprisingly, at least on this particular issue,
Advisor. At least what advice he given?
advising. I suspect what he would have done was exactly what Modi did, which is abrogate 370, but then not do a 180-degree flip and change the domicile requirements for there. He would have ensured that there was a demographic change out there. He would have ensured the entire system, because Kashmir is a conflict economy. Everybody out there is incentivized monetarily in continuing the conflicts. The army is incentivized, the paramilitary forces are incentivized, the Jammu Kashmir police is incentivized, the government is incentivized, government servants are incentivized, the ordinary people are incentivized in a continuation of terrorism, because it leads to promotions, it leads to more money. Conflict economies are extremely, like we've seen in Bosnia and things like that. Conflict economies they're a nightmare, right? They're an absolute corrupt little nightmare. So he would have been much more thorough. He would have seen to it that the demographic changes need to take place and the entire conflict economy was deconflicted. On Ladakh and on China, he would have done, again, exactly what Modi is doing, which is to build up infrastructure left, right, and center. But then he would have also probably joined, well, we can't join NATO, we're not North Atlantic, but he would have signed some kind of treaty with
We're Indo-Pacific. President
the
Trump has been
Americans.
extremely nice to
And
India.
then he would have flown to Moscow to say, look, we're your friends. This is the treaty we've signed with America. We are American allies, except if you and America get into hot water. Then we're not allies with them. We'll declare ourselves neutral in any Russia-America ball game. And we would like to invite you, Russia, to become a partner in our industrial growth, because you are no longer an industrial country. You're basically a white Saudi Arabia. You're a commodities economy. So come, we will give you subsystems contracts and things like that for all the Western equipment we're building. If you manage to do well, you integrate into our economy, you become like a Canada to our America or whatever, right? I suspect that is what Chanakya would have done. And he would have set a goal, like he set a goal to destroy Nanda. He would have set a goal to destroy China in about 20 years. And he would have worked untiringly and ceaselessly towards that goal. He wouldn't have ruminated on all these philosophical shit that our so-called modern day Chanakyas do. Oh, but if Pakistan collapses, what will we do? Are we sure that what comes in its place will be better or worse? He wouldn't have been bogged down by these false philosophical questions. This is the kind of pseudo-philosophical shit that passes off as profundity in India.
No, you're absolutely right. There's a very Amitabh Bachchan Koli song, सारी दुनिया का बोझ हम उठाते हैं, लोग आते हैं और चले जाते हैं. So that exactly fits in the Hindu mindset today, that we are more worried about others' identity than our own identity.
But remember, that is also the Hindu way of life these days, unfortunately, which I think is completely adharmic. That you are more concerned about other people talking about your children than the happiness of your children.
Exactly.
Right? That's very, very common in India. The second thing, which I believe is adharmic, is it is also sort of a problem with our foreign policy. But it is also an individual problem that I notice with a lot of Indians, that we treat people who treat us well like shit, and we bend over backwards to please people who treat us like shit. Politeness, kindness are seen as weakness. And this is across India. It is there with Indian foreign policy. China keeps spitting on us year after year, every single year, and we bend over backwards for them. America has been treating us very, very well for the last 20, 30 years. And we treat them like shit. At the drop of a hat, you're like, you're bending down to American hegemony. America is a colonialist. America did this. America did that. How does it matter? What did they do to you? How have they treated their other friends? Excluding Taiwan. Okay. How have they treated their other friends? Pretty damn well. Remember, Taiwan, South Korea, all these countries, they became democracies being in the American camp, and they became Greece. They all became Spain. They all became democracies peacefully under American, under the Pax Americana, being American allies. And why do you think that was? It was because the American dream was very clear. You leave global politics to us. We will do all the war fighting. You develop your economy and develop large enough markets that can cater to America and can be catered to from America. So they all went into the industrial age. Remember, Spain was a very backward country. Greece was a very backward country. Taiwan and South Korea had been destroyed completely. They all industrialized based on American markets. And then they came to that natural inflection point. See, hard industrialization requires a strong state. But the information age and the digital age require the state to take a back seat, and they allow civil society to take the front seat. Remember, till 1979, North Korea had a higher per capita income than South Korea. And till 1979, North Korea was the second richest country in Asia after Japan. It is when the digital revolution and the information revolution starts in 1980, the digital revolution starts in 1980, and in 1990 it becomes the information revolution, that all these countries, there's that period from 1975 to 1995, that 20-year period where the digital revolution and the information revolution come through, that all these American allies start democratizing. Why? Because they had industrial economies. The mandate of the government to its people was, we will keep delivering on economic growth. To do that, they had to transition to an information age economy. And an information age economy means the state has to take a back seat. This is why China will never grow out of being a middle income economy, because the state is simply unwilling to take a back seat. Right? All of this has happened under Pax Americana. You know, I these days when I hear people just go ape shit about America, I really feel like punching them in the nose. I'm not a violent person, but I really do feel like punching them. I feel like taking my very, very, very expensive French copper pots and creating permanent marks on their face. You know, it's the most bloody ridiculous thing. It is an empire, of course. It is the most bloody benign empire you have seen in the last bazillion years. It is a purely capitalistic construct, as opposed to Britain, which was a mercantilistic, exploitative construct. America works on self-interest, mostly did. Now, with all the nonsense I'm seeing, the way the Democrat Party goes, I'm not very convinced that they're anymore driven by self-interest, because they seem to be, in the hand of a bunch of loonies that are scoring their own goals. But anyway, I mean, that's America's problem, not India's.
I'm a very intrinsic part of American politics, like you know, and the hidden America always speaks up, just like the hidden India always speaks up at the right time. And that Americanism or American exceptionalism, which most of the world cannot agree with, but I think that's the reason of their success also, because they try to achieve that exceptionalism over other people. So my next topic, but maybe we'll cover in next session. Today is already late for you. And my next topic will be American exceptionalism versus world productivity. Now, and we'll think about it and do it next time. But thank you so much for this show. Before I leave, what if possible that China got its faith from India. So in a way, they are dharmic cousins. Do you think that resonates far within the Chinese psyche today, or they've forgotten about it?
They've forgotten it. Communism destroyed any residual, whatever. See, it destroyed Chinese culture. I don't think we realize the amount of damage. You know, the Communist Party killed 7 to 10 times the number of Chinese citizens that the Japanese army killed. You can't lose 70 million, upwards of 70 million people, and not be completely changed as a society. Absolutely. You know, one of the things you'll notice is that how vicious these social justice warrior mobs are. They're no different from a medieval Jew lynching pogrom. Okay, and there's a reason for it. We realize that religion was a much needed. I mean, you can keep making fun of religion. I don't believe in God, but I believe in religion. Why? Because religion, not everybody can be as moral as, say, I am being an atheist, without worrying about rebirth and all of that, without worrying about consequences for the next life. You see that political correctness is on the rise in all post-religious societies. And we've realized why. It's because society needs some form of control. I would much rather prefer religion, which we've had a tactile relationship with for the last 20, 30,000 years, than political correctness, which is basically a modern day witch hunt that started off in the last 5, 6 years. And it's basically, have you watched that? What was that Salem witch trial movie with Winona Ryder and Daniel Day-Lewis? Where all these girls, they go crazy when they're accusing witches of witchcraft or whatever. I don't know. Look it up. I mean, it's like that. It's literally like those witch hunts right now. So what you see today is that you need some form of social control. This post-religious society simply isn't working out. And religion, for all its dangers, was still somewhat more comfortable than this political correctness, because you never know where it turns. It is such a dangerously unpredictable tool. And well, I mean, that's it.
Excellent point, Abhujit. It's always a pleasure to have you. I have 900 questions being asked. There are around 1,300 people watched you live just now. And
Let's ask. I mean, we'll take as many questions as we can.
just one question I'll have on their behalf. I'll just say that who will win if China and India fight today?
China. It's going to be like the American Civil War. The South may have greater elan and panache and win a few flashy victories here and there, but in the end, it was the industrial might of the North that won out, and that's exactly what's going to happen with between India and China. India might allow a lot more freedom to its officers. It may have a lot more scope for innovation and things like that on the battlefield. You don't see that right now, but there will be during a time of need. But the industrial strength of China is so great, and it is so far ahead of us. There's literally nothing we can do. And we've screwed ourselves over because for the last 15, 20 years, we've just neglected the military. We think that somehow buying arms equals modernization. Buying arms does not equal modernization. If you've got a broken plumbing job at home, plus your house is being eaten by termites, just putting in a new shower without changing the plumbing and without fixing the termites isn't going to help you much. That's unfortunately what India is doing. We equate equipment purchases with military modernization. So China would win, downright. It'll take time, but it'll win. Ultimately, it'll win a crushing victory.
Since you're allowed, I'll say just one more question. This is coming from Melanie herself. Melanie wants to know that is Buddhism, I think you already answered it. Is the religion Buddhism play any role in Chinese soldiers' psyche when they're fighting with India?
No, I've never come across a more amoral people than the Chinese, precisely because all religion in them has been destroyed. Confucianism set the rules of correct behavior, right? Not that it prevented crazy loony emperors and things like that, but still it acted as some form of social control. Taoism acted as some form of social control. Buddhism acted as a form of social control. Today, there is absolutely no form of social control over the Chinese. There is no belief in right and wrong. You look at the way they torture animals to eat them. What person does that? I eat meat. I eat all kinds of meat. I eat beef. I eat pork, and all of that. The only thing I see to it is that it's properly brought up, and it's cruelty-free meat, because I have 3D vision, ranging. It's meant for the hunt. I've got these canines, if you can see, the very sharp canines, because they've been sharpened on lots of very delicious steaks and things like that. I am, and yet it doesn't affect my morality, because there's an old story about this, that there was this tiger. I think it's in the Jataka tales, which are Jain tales. This tiger goes to this rishi who is meditating in the forest, and it says, "Oh, great rishi, please I no longer want to be a non-vegetarian hunter. I want to be an evolved soul. So he says, yes, you must now eat grass, and you must eat the rice that I cook, and you must be meditating all day. So the tiger tries meditating, and it tries eating grass and bananas and rice. And finally, something snaps, it kills the rishi and it eats him. And when the rishi goes to heaven and he meets Vishnu, he's like, look at that evil tiger. Look what it did to me. I thought it was going to be a good sadhu tiger, Maharishi tiger, and then it ended up killing me. Vishnu's like, you're the bloody idiot in all of this. If it was meant to be a Maharishi, I would have seen to it took birth as a Maharishi, as a human being, not as a tiger. It was put on earth to be a tiger. Okay, so this is like that. You look at the Chinese. I have never come across a more pitiless, and the Chinese weren't like this. Remember, this kind of animal torture, animal cruelty nonsense that you see, all of this is a product of all the famines and things like that, which vastly expanded these people's diet. There's something very, very wrong happening out there socially. I feel it. I've never felt as uncomfortable, even in Iran, in Turkmenistan, in foremost in Belarus. I haven't felt as uncomfortable as I have in China, because there's just something really, really bizarre about that place. Remember, till 1990, it was as much of a nut job state as North Korea is. And North Korea is the other place I've been to, which scared the living daylights out of me. So even though it was weirdly nostalgic, because 1980s India growing up in Delhi was exactly like Pyongyang today. Different matter, we'll talk about that later. There is something wrong out there that needs to be fixed, and no past religion or method or morality is influencing their decisions. It isn't even dharmic in that sense. It's just scary, psychotic.
Thank you, Abhujit, and thank you all the viewers. And based on a popular demand, one of the videos will make it live on YouTube, so you can chat with him directly and see him. And our new studio is starting on Monday, a brand new studio. We're going to compete with many international shows in the world. So thank you, Abhijit. It's always a pleasure to hear you, and the spontaneity that you bring on the table, and the honesty and the candor and the frankness, anything. And many Americans love you from this show, and in fact we have many offers. So we'll talk about it later. Thank you so
Great.
much. Namaskar.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Live
you.
long and prosper.